To start off this tutorial, we're going to start to do some housekeeping to get our hierarchy and project files in order. The first thing you should notice is that my assets folder is very neat. It's separated into different folders where I have all of my materials put in, all of my prefabs, our scenes, and our scripts. Okay, make sure that you have these files all nice and neat, and these are the main folders. It's okay if you have folders inside of each of these folders as well, but these are the main four that we want to have. Also in the hierarchy, what I'm going to show you is how to start grouping these objects together. For example, maybe you have a lot of collectibles in your scene. For right now I just have 6, but let's say we had 20. It's going to cover up this entire hierarchy window. So we want to be able to group things together. So we're going to do that with one single parent object. So instead of creating an object in this menu, we want to create an empty game object that's just going to house all these collectibles. So we're going to go over into game object, create empty. Right, this is just an empty game object. Notice it doesn't have any other components except for the transform. It's got a position, rotation, and scale. The one we really are concerned about is the position. If you look in the scene view, the reason it's called an empty is because there's nothing there. I can move it around and it's basically just a point in space. However, the object does show up in the hierarchy panel. So I'm just going to rename this collectibles. Notice it's plural because it's going to house all of the collectibles. So this, I'm just going to reset its transform position, and it's going to put it right in the center of my game world, which is 0, 0, 0. And zeroing that out just shows that these coordinates here for all of the child objects are going to have their same coordinates in respect to the global position. If you didn't reset the transform position here, all of the coordinates for these collectibles would change to in respect to this collectibles game object. So in order to child them, kind of already talked about this in a previous tutorial, but just to recap, I'm going to select all my collectibles by just clicking and holding shift. And now I'm just going to drag these, and notice collectibles kind of highlights there. And when I let go, it looks like they disappear in the hierarchy view. However, they're still there, but they're all under this parent object called collectibles, the empty object. If I click this arrow, they're still all there. Since this collectibles object is the parent, if I move this, it moves all of the collectibles. Pretty cool. Alright, I'm just going to reset that position here real quick. There we go. Alright, we want to do the same thing for any lights that you have created, especially directional lights. We want to put that all under the same. And then any type of solid objects like walls, floors, things like that. So I'm going to create one more empty object. I'm going to rename it. This is going to be lights. I'll reset its position, and I'm going to drag my 2 lights to be child objects of the new light transform. So now when I move my lights transform, both of the lights move. Alright, that's done. And now I'm going to create one more empty for our solid objects. You can name it whatever you want. You don't have to name it the same things I am. However, my naming convention is pretty similar to any object. I basically just call it the name and then make it plural. So we got lights, collectibles, and then just so it's a single word, solids. I'll reset the position. And now I'm going to take all of my solid objects, which is my walls, and then my floor. I'm going to hold down Control, click on floor, and notice it selects all of them. And I'll drag into solids. Alright. Notice that our objects here are much more consolidated and nicely organized. If I want to pick out solid objects in the game view, I just need to open this up, and now I can select them. This is also convenient if you need to move entire parts of a level. You can just parent it, select the parent object, and then move it around. So this moves the entire game world. You don't have to move one each individually and note the coordinates. Okay, so we have an objective for our players to go around and collect all of these collectibles, but nothing's really happening when we touch them. Alright, so we want to add some type of score that is shown to the player when they collect an object. Alright, so we need to script in that score. However, since that score is going to be referenced by multiple components, eventually if we do want to continue this game, we should probably put in more than one level And that means we're going to need an object that can go from level to level or from scene to scene. So we want to put any type of global variables or global events on some type of object that's going to go from scene to scene. For example, the player can just be recreated in each level. We don't actually want to save that from level to level. We're going to create a new empty object, and I'm going to call this Game Master. Okay. The reason I'm calling it Game Master is normally it's called Game Controller, where it's going to control all the main mechanics or core mechanics of the game. I'm going to actually name the script that we're going to attach to this object Game Controller. So just so it's easy to understand in this tutorial, I wanted the name of the object to be different than the name of the script, even though it could very well be the same. But for now, I'm just going to name the object Game Master and the script Game Controller. Alright, so we'll go ahead and create the script next. And again, this is just so you know or can better understand the difference between the two. I'm going to call this Game Controller. Alright, so I have my new script. Before we even code in it, I'm going to go ahead and attach it to my Game Master object. And I did forget to reset its position, so we'll go ahead and do that. Just the gear menu in the top right, reset position. Alright, so again, you're not going to be able to see this Game Master object. However, this object is going to persist or stay in the scene as... Okay, so I'm going to double click on the Game Controller script and we'll start to edit. As I was walking around in class, I noticed some common errors is that the class doesn't match the name of the script. Always make sure that's the case if you get an error. So this script is called Game Controller and it matches the name of the script up in the top left hand corner. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little larger so it's easier to see. Another error that was popping up quite frequently was the opening and closing brackets. Okay, when a script is being written, we need to have an opening bracket saying anytime you create a method, there also needs to be opening and closing brackets. Right, showing where the method starts, all the code that's inside of it, and then the closing bracket. What's nice about MonoDevelop is that when you click near a bracket, it actually highlights the opening or closing one, and it's easier to see where the method starts and where the method ends, or where the script starts and where the script ends. Okay, notice the indenting as well. All of that, it makes it easier to read. So what we wanted to do was create a score so that when the player runs into the collectible, it adds some points to the score. So first thing we need to do is create a variable. We can either make it public or private. Since other scripts are going to access this, we must make it public. If it's private, that means no other scripts can access the variable, and we don't want that. Your score can either be a decimal, meaning a float, or an int. I'm just going to create an int and call it score. And right off the bat, I'll set it to 0. So what's nice about C# is that you can create a variable but also assign it in the same instance. Okay, and this is what the initial value will be. When we get into saving data, meaning saving scores for levels and loading player preferences and settings, we may not want to do this, but we'll change it later. For now, every time we start the game, we want the score to be 0. I'm going to go ahead and save my script, make sure that we have no errors and my script is compiling properly. Okay. So now we need to show that when the player hits the collectible, it's going to add 1 to the score. And the score is in the Game Controller script. You can see here on the left. Well, the collectible controller event is right here, where the player is colliding with the trigger. It's going to destroy that game object. Well, this is where we want to go ahead and add the score. The issue is we cannot just say, okay, score plus equals 1. Okay, now the issue with that is right here we have an error. If we try to do that, and just as an example, you guys don't have to do this, but I'm going to save it. Go back into Unity, notice the error name. The name score does not exist in the current context. That's because this variable is not in this script. We have to tell it where to get this variable from. Since it's in another script, we have to now,
since
grab
we're probably going
to be
doing this quite a bit,
okay,
we're going to go ahead and create variables.
We have two different ways. Let's go ahead and do it the easiest way, which is going to do it in 1 or 2 lines of code. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And what we want to do first is grab some game object. Okay, so I'm going to say game object. Notice the capitalization, capital G, capital O. So this is going to grab an game object, but we got to tell it what to find. So we're going to say find, parentheses, and now notice IntelliSense is telling us how to grab the object. It's going to be a string, meaning a line of text, and it wants the name of the object. Well, the name of the object that we want to grab the script from, we called it game master. And I did that on purpose so it wasn't the same as the script. So we need to go back in here, game master dot get component. So what we have so far is we're grabbing a game object and it's finding the game master, and then notice the dot, because once we grab that object we now need to get a component. Remember, all the components are listed on the right hand side here. We want the game controller component, which is a script. All right, so we use a less than sign. Game controller is the name of the script, and then we use 2 parentheses, open and close, dot score. Notice that in IntelliSense it actually shows up here. If it's not showing up here, that means you typed in something wrong. So we need to go through and change that text. Since it's popping up, that means everything's typed in, right? Score, and now we can go ahead and add 1 to it. When I type in the rest of this, remember our operator here, plus equals, means we're just going to add whatever value we want to it. This you can change, that's personable. I'm just going to use 1 for now. Alright, I'll go ahead and save that script. Come back here. It's going to compile and our error is gone. Okay, so there are no errors. However, when we run the game, we're not going to be able to tell if score is increasing or not. So in this same step, let's go ahead and create a debug statement. Very similar to what we did in Visual Basic, only instead of debug.writeLine, it's debug.log, meaning it's going to write some message into the log. So we have our set of parentheses and then also quotes because we need to enter in a string into the log. And we're just going to say score is now, and I'll put in a space. And now when we want to concatenate strings together, instead of a plus sign as we did in Visual Basic, we have to use an ampersand, which is the AND symbol. Our debug log statement is now going to say score is now and now we need to grab this variable again. Alright, so since we do need to grab this multiple times, it takes up a lot of processing power to find the game master object, then grab the component, grab the score, and then do something with it. Since we are using this multiple times, let's go ahead and take this and create variables to hold these different objects. So this is going to be our first experience creating variables for objects, which is not too bad. Very similar to numbers such as ints and floats. This script is the only one that's going to have to access these variables, so we'll do private variables. And we're going to create a private variable for a game object. And this is going to be our game master. And I'll just abbreviate GM. Right. We also need a private variable for our script. So the script attached to that game object is game controller, and I'll call it GC. Okay, looks like there is an error down here, so for now I'm just going to put in quotes so that error goes away. Earlier I took out the start method. We will need that method, so I'm just going to type it back in. So void start is a basic method that runs intuitively at the start. So before any other code is run in the script, right off the bat when the script is started, these are the events that are going to happen. So we need to now assign these game object variables to what their game objects are. So it's very similar to this statement down here. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to say GM. Notice the capitalization is equal to game object.find game master. And next we have CG equals, and we need to get the game object, which we already did right here. So we can just say GM dot, and now the rest of it is going to be this get component part. Take that, put it in there. Alright, so now notice that GC is the game controller script, and it's already grabbed right here. So instead of this entire line, we'll only have to type it in as GC. So now this is saying grab the, it should be GC. I've been saying CG for a game controller. There we go. That looked better. So our game controller script is referenced down here, dot, and then it's grabbing the variable from that script. So over in our game controller script, it's grabbing this variable that we created right here. Alright, and it's adding one to it. So now the whole purpose of that was so that we can just do gc.score down here. And it's going to input the same exact score into our debug statement. Right. For the purpose of this tutorial, because it's the first time we're doing these types of statements, I'm going to go ahead and put in the comments. But I challenge you to put in the comments first and see what you think the logic of these statements should be, and then we'll compare. So this is what your code should be similar to. Your comments don't have to be exactly like mine. However, looking through the comments here, you can now see the logic of where each line of code is coming from. Make sure that you save your script before you go back into Unity. There's no asterisk at the top, so my script is saved. I'm actually going to check all my scripts. Look like we're good. I'm going to go back into Unity. It'll compile, and it looks like we do have an error. Collectible controller line 33. Sorry about that, folks. It looks like the error, instead of an ampersand, we do want the plus sign. I was backwards. In Visual Basic, we use the ampersand. In C#, we use the plus sign to put strings together. Okay. When you compile it, save it, come back into Unity, we should have no errors. Alright, so let's go ahead and test this out. See what our game is going to look like. So our game is playing. When we go ahead and run into an object, our score changes. There's still no notifications on the game view that shows that the score has changed. However, we do have a console message down here. It says score is now 1. When I go ahead and run into another collectible, it changes and now score is 2. So it is working. Our code is running correctly. So the next step would be to actually show the player that their score is increasing so they know that something is happening. So I'm going to go ahead and save my scene in my project here real quick. Alright, so the way that we're going to be able to put text on the screen for the player is to go up and create, and we have GUI text. We'll go ahead and continue this in the next tutorial, since this tutorial is getting pretty long.